Salutations everyone, and welcome to another Overwatch video here. Today I'm going to be talking about the first week of Season 3 of the Overwatch League, where we got to see, where the pro meta is at, as well as like all the new faces and the new different, team comps, all the different players switching teams, and we have the different homestands every weekend. So it's definitely going to be a very, very different Overwatch League, just because of the travel and just we have had so many new players and old players in different places. So it's there was a lot to digest from this. Obviously, you also have the move from Twitch to YouTube. I'm not really sure how well they felt that they did for the viewership. The numbers are definitely going to be different, but if you want to watch it, Twitch, YouTube doesn't really matter. Some people found like it was more stable. I found a lot of hitches in mine, but that wasn't because it was on YouTube. It's just the production. The production had a lot of weird hiccups, like a lot of them too. It was very odd, but I think that might have to do with the fact that they're just no longer just in LA every weekend. Granted, there were a couple of homestands last season, and obviously you have that fantastic esports arena down there in Dallas. And, they had their homestand where they got absolutely crushed. People, came out with their predictions and their power rankings and stuff like that. So let's get into that a little bit. You have like all of the different analysts and play-by-play people and commentary people, making their predictions, and almost every single one just said the exact same shit, which is exactly what we would expect from the last two seasons. They all, like, season one, everyone had Boston at the bottom, right? Granted, there was no reason to believe that, Boston was going to be as good as it was, but it, clearly the people that, this is supposed to be what they're known for and good at, obviously don't really know how to predict stuff. And I would say that's the same with anybody. All the pro players and all the big, content creators, pretty much all of them are terrible at predicting metas and how good teams are going to be. And you just see a lot of weird biases get thrown around there, especially when it comes to, certain types of players. Obviously, you had the signing of a streamer to be a Doomfist player, whom I even forget what his name is now. But obviously there was the whole hullabaloo about his brother being part of the coaching staff, and was this kosher or not? But Chipsa, was that his name? I forget. Anyway, I don't even think he's a top 3, or definitely not a top 2 even Doomfist streamer. So I don't know why. Was it Philly that picked him up? It just really dumb. These streamers are just like so overhyped, and they just do not perform very well at all. XQC was pretty shitty in the Overwatch League, and then last year we had the Atlanta Reign had Defran, and it's like we knew what was going to happen. He was going to play as little as possible and then quit, and that's exactly what he did, because he's a little bitch baby, and that's what they do. So some people can't cut it. You have all the predictions. People always think that Dallas and Houston are going to be good. They thought so in the first season that they would both be easily top 5 teams, and they were just jack shit. And then last season they were both even worse. And then you still have people this season thinking that, oh, Dallas is going to be good because they want it so bad for some reason, because you have Envy and Optic, blah blah blah, whatever. Dallas is not good, and Houston is not good, and neither of them going to make any waves. So they overhyped both of those teams again, I feel. Obviously, we got to see Dallas and all of their faults. Once again, for the third season in a row, they are highly valuing both LA teams, especially the Gladiators. Obviously, the Valiant showed a bit more promise than people thought, even though everyone heard that they were really, really good in scrims. And you have the Gladiators, whom losing Decay and Surefour and Hydration, and then obviously, the tank shakeup, have brand new DPS, and they got Bishu back, and they brought in Space from the Valiant and kept their support line, but just completely different roster. and nobody gave them a shot against Vancouver Titans, and they took them to the final map. And they honestly should have won that first control point. So, you know, it almost went as far as it could have possibly gone. But you have pretty much everybody having the exact same picks. Shanghai for the Pacific East. This one continues to fluctuate. Some people say like Guangzhou, or, you know, some people have Seoul. But everybody has the Shock in the West, which I think are super overhyped. You have New York in the North, which I think is a good, safe pick. They are definitely, I think, easily a top 2 team right now. I feel like both the Shock and the Titans are overhyped, just because like they were so dominant in the GOATS meta, and were still able to pull things off in the playoffs. I still think highly overvalued, especially the Shock. But I think New York, easily one of the better teams in the early goings of things, and I think they're definitely a lock at a very weak conference in the Atlantic North. Obviously, the Pacific West being the strongest by far, because it has both the Shock and the Titans, obviously, but you also have, you know, the Gladiators and the Valiant, so easily the best. And then you have the Atlantic South, which everyone's picking Atlanta, which they had a bit of an up and down season last season, and so I think they're definitely a question mark and should not be considered an automatic front runner, as so many people are picking them to be. You have like 1 or 2 people picking Philly Fusion. So, and there's a lot of teams that we haven't seen, and it is still just the first week, but we definitely got to see a lot of things, a lot of people being proven wrong. Like nobody picking Paris over London, and Paris just takes a dump on the Spitfire. I don't know why people were picking on Spitfire, because there's a bunch of unknowns that nobody knows anything about. And obviously Paris has their Element Mystic people that aren't all eligible to play because they aren't 18, but they still showed some amazing play, and I think I might be an up-and-coming Paris Eternal fan, because that is a pretty darn good team. Obviously, Shields up through and through, Gladiators, I'll admit I have my biases as well. But every single analyst and commentator has the Shock as easily repeat champions, and it's stupid. Everybody has a Shock member as the MVP, and Rookie of the Year obviously is going to be all over the place. And then Dark Horse team, you got people talking about the Dragons, even though a lot of people are picking them to win. And then you also have a lot of people going with Florida Mayhem, I think just because they hope they're not as bad as they have been. Because if you take a look at the first 2 seasons, they are the worst team and franchise, even with Shanghai not winning a single game in the first season. Their second season was just so much better, and there's just always a fun team to watch, and definitely have a chance at making the playoffs for this season. So let's also, take a look at how the matches actually went. Well, first off, let's go with the meta. So what was the meta? A lot of people had their speculations of, oh, Genji's not going to be meta ever. You had so many pro players and like old pro players and commentators and people saying, oh, Genji will never be meta. Genji was all over the fucking place in the first week of Overwatch League. Granted, he wasn't like a top 3 or top 4 DPS pick, but you saw a lot of Genji, and Dragon Blade's always going to be meta. Dragon Blade's always going to put Genji in the meta, whether he has the nano boost or not. Genji's always going to have a place. You saw plenty of Genji at the end of last season after Roll Q was instituted, but you also saw almost as much Symmetra as you did Genji. So let's take a look at the hero usage throughout the league. Number 1, you had Lucio. No surprise there. He's the most meta hero throughout all time. Lucio has been in every single meta. You have the Mercy meta. Mercy was obviously there, but the secondary was pretty much always Lucio or Zenyatta. But then obviously once Mercy fell off, you saw tons of Lucio. GOATS meta was not because of Brig, it was Lucio. If people are talking about, if we had hero bans, we would have banned Brigitte and then GOATS wouldn't happen. No. Pros would not ban Brigitte, they would ban Lucio, because Lucio is what enabled GOATS to do their thing. It wasn't Brig. Brig just flourished in GOATS. She didn't make GOATS flourish. GOATS made her good. And then, of course, in the main tank role at 88%, Lucio was at 91% usage, by the way, being sometimes substituted in for Baptiste or Moira. And then you had Reinhardt at 88.7%. Obviously, the main tank, the only main tank in the game right now that can be used. We saw a little bit of Winston, but it just really didn't work. Maybe people will start to try to use Winston in the off-tank role, but you know, there's a lot of speculation that Wrecking Ball would be better in that instance. But in the off-tank role, we saw D.Va or Orisa, with D.Va at 69% and Orisa at 26%. So every single team ran either Rein D.Va or Rein Orisa, because Orisa and D.Va are the best off-tanks in the meta right now. The most picked DPS by far was Mei. If anyone thought she would not still rule the meta, they are insanely wrong. Mei was just destroying things, or Blizzard, her wall. Like, I think this weekend showed just how important wall is. It's the most important, most impactful ability in the entire game, bar none. Some people would say Bionade, some people would say Defense Matrix, some people would even say Orisa pull, even pre-nerf. But no. It has been and always will be, unless they change it, Mei's wall. Nothing will be as important in Mei's wall, and this week absolutely showed why, of splitting people up, of blocking ultimates. I mean, when Reinhardt is the only shield tank, main tank that you can play right now, Mei is the best off tank in the game. It's really not D.Va or Orisa, it's Mei, because that wall is better than any barrier. It blocks all ultimates except for her own, which just, you know, it's like back in the old Pokemon TCG meta. Psychic was the best because it was only weak against itself, so there was no reason not to play it, right? It's the same with Mei. She's just insane against everything. You can't run dive because of her existence, as well as Reaper, who is still very much in the meta, even though nobody thought he would ever be meta forever. And then last year, you saw Reaper just run over things because of how insanely powerful and power crept that character is. And even after the nerfs, still the third most picked DPS character. A lot of people were surprised to see McCree as the second most picked DPS, and we got to see the likes of Decay and XZ just putting on a show with McCree, and you had Ana usually as the secondary support character being subbed in with Moira or Baptiste, and a tiny bit of Brig and negligible Mercy and Zenyatta play. So we had Lucio, Rein, Mei, D.Va, Ana, McCree most of the time. And you would sub out a D.Va for Orisa, which sometimes in that match between the Rein Orisa and Rein D.Va, sometimes the D.Va won pretty easily, other times the Orisa team won pretty easily. So I think people are still going to try to figure things out. Obviously, D.Va is so much better at diving now with those thrusters and chasing down the likes of Tracers and Balls and Genjis and obviously any stationary squishy. But Symmetra was melting through everything, especially if you saw XZ from the Paris Eternal on his Symmetra in multiple games and multiple rounds, just destroying things with Symmetra, overtaking the game completely. So let's take a look at some of those games. First off, we had the Paris Eternal against the Toronto Defiant, and this was really just the XZ show. XZ was just destroying Toronto. I think their coaching is not good. Obviously, they did pick up Surefour, and for some reason played Logix instead on the first point. You had Agilities on the Mei and Logix as Reaper, Doomfist, and Sim. I don't know why. How when you had Surefour as, I think you could say Somensu was the most dominant Reaper last year, but Surefour was definitely there when it came to playmaking. He was easily in the top 2. But the fact that you put Logix at any DPS role over Surefour is just astounding to me. And so Logix couldn't do anything, and then once Surefour got in there, did much better on the Reaper as well as the McCree. But you got to see some good plays by Kariv, obviously very underrated from last season. Now that Ana can be played much more often, but this was a lot of XZ just showing off, and Nico was doing well as good, but FD God was taking things over whenever it wasn't XZ, especially in Paris's second game against London. FD God, the Lucio, was putting on one of the more dominant weekend performances of Lucio that we have ever seen. So that was just a quick win for the Paris Eternal over the Toronto Defiant. I don't think there's any reason to expect much from Toronto this year, even though they have, a good solid support line and some good DPS. They just don't have very good tank players, and I think their coaching is just uninspired. And then we had London versus New York. Everyone picked New York to dominate, and they absolutely did. We got to see some Nene, obviously Jonak on that Ana, Hotba doing what he does on that Diva. Good to see that again. And we got to see some plays from Bernard, from Spitfire, but this is just such a nothing team that we have no reason to really expect much from London in this season. And then we had the Gladiators versus the Titans, which I said, as I mentioned, went the distance. And we still have the solid backline of Shaz and Big Goose. I think Big Goose has always been the best Lucio in the Overwatch League, and that's definitely a role that you do not see highlighted much. But when it came to offense and peeling and getting amazing clutch beats and boops, Big Goose is number one, I think, in all of those factors, personally. Obviously, the DPS changes are a big downgrade, going with Jaru / Mirror and Birdring. A lot of question marks about Birdring, right? Especially when he was so good in Season 1 and Season 2, not so much. And you have the question marks over how much he's really going to try and be into this. But people were surprised to see Birdring do so well, mostly on the McCree. And that was a surprise, I should say, as a Gladiators fan myself. I feel like if we had last year's roster, at the very least kept our 3 DPS players, the Gladiators would probably be a top 2 team because of how flexible teams need to be. If you're not sure, if you didn't know, there are going to be hero pools. I think they said they're starting in week 5, so for the first month there will not be hero pools, but once it does happen, you're going to need a more flexible lineup. And there was no better 3 DPS players at playing multiple roles at the highest level than Surefour, Hydration, and Decay. Decay, I think, was the better Tracer over Surefour, and possibly the better Sombra as well. Surefour was the better Mei and Reaper, which was unfortunate because you couldn't play him on both, and you needed Mei and Reaper all of last season. So you had, Decay on the Mei. And obviously, when they needed something crazy, Hydration, one of the best Doomfists in the world, and easily top 2 Pharah player. We know Ding was playing a lot more Pharah last season and made a lot more plays. But when it came to when you needed a big Pharah play, or when there was a Pharah 1v1, Hydration was completely dominant against any other Pharah or Bastion setups. If you remember the playoffs and those games against the Titans, where Hydration was crushing it. I don't think, a great Genji, but we have Decay as a Genji player, because I don't think Surefour is a top tier Genji player either. So if you need a Genji, we would have had Decay. If you needed a Widow, you could have Decay or Surefour. If you needed a McCree, you could have had Decay or Surefour. If you needed a Tracer, you have Decay. You needed a Pharah or a Doomfist, you could have Hydration. If you needed a Bastion, all 3 of them dominated on Bastion last year. Easily the best Bastion team that was running. But regardless, we have to deal with what we have right now. Hopefully Mirror can show some more flash that like he did at times in this weekend. Cloudy on the main tank role as Reinhardt was a nice surprise. Got some huge plays. And then obviously Space, I think, was always underrated, and especially if you saw what he did at the World Cup, this should be no surprise that he's doing as well as he did. But Fissure, I think, putting a lot of questions to rest at the very least in the first week of how well he was going to work with his team. And then obviously you have Haksal on the Genji and the Mei just crushing things, and Janu doing very well. And I think Stitch was okay, but outplayed by the other DPS players on the other side of things. So very, very close game between those two. And then you had the Fuel against the Valiant. The Valiant just rolled over the Fuel, even though the Fuel are better than they even were last year, with the addition of Decay. And obviously you got Gamsu on that team. But the Valiant DPS line looks the best right now out of any team, with KSF and KSP. with KSF on the May one. I think probably top 2 May this weekend was KSF, and KSP I think was top 2 McCree. I think right there with XG. Some good Reaper play as well, and I think the rest of the team might not be as great, but this team is definitely going to be surprising people since everyone's always high on the fuel, even though they're always garbage. And the Valiant, I think, are definitely going to give a lot more teams a run for the money than people thought. There were definitely question marks and some unknowns on how things were going to work with that team, but when you have a DPS line that good, I think there's not as much to worry about. We're just going to have to see if they can, clean things up a little bit better around the edges and some ult usage. And then London Spitfire Paris Eternal, as mentioned, it's just a complete wash. The Paris Eternal 3-0ing the Spitfire with FD God just crushing on that Lucio. And you saw a little bit more XG with his Symmetra as well as the McCree. So real good stuff coming out of there. Boston, New York, everybody saw this as an easy Excelsior win, and it was. Getting to see Sabiol be a little bit on Tracer, but obviously with the McCree as well. So Boston, not looking good. I think, even their best players are a bit overrated, and I think they're just not a very good team anymore. And then you had the Valiant against the Titans, which was not nearly as close as the Gladiators against the Titans, but still had some very valiant fights, if you will. We know the Valiant were the first team to ever take out the Titans, and while both teams are different, especially the Valiant being much, much different, even though it was very, very one-sided, people were still surprised with how well the Valiant did, even in a drubbing like that. And then you had the Fuel versus the Shock, was just the Shock, of course, crushing the Fuel. No surprise there. Choyobin, I think, showing that he was definitely a much better pick to be MVP last year than Sinatra. I hate the fact that fans picked who the MVP was. Like, you realize MVP stands for most valuable player, right? And how was last year's most valuable player a player who didn't play a fourth of the season because you didn't need him? That doesn't sound like value to me. He was only valuable when it was the GOATS meta and he was playing Zarya. A great Zarya, I'll give you that. But you can't say he was so valuable when you didn't even need to play him for a fourth of the season. Not because the rest of the team was so good. It was a really good team, but he just wasn't good enough on the damage role to have him there. You put your damage player on Zarya in the GOATS meta, but when it came to role queue, Sinatra disappeared, and that doesn't sound like value to me. So obviously the most, popular player on a really good team is going to get MVP every single time when it comes to fan votes. And the fan votes is just really kind of a joke, especially seeing it in the Overwatch League. When you take a look at the All-Star game that had bench players who hadn't played a single minute the entire season playing the All-Star game. No. That's an absolute joke. I know people like Pine because he had 2 really good plays last year off of the bench, but no, he should not have been an all-star last year. That is absolutely ludicrous. I know it's all about the fans and what they want to see, but it's honestly a joke. You don't put a bench player as a starting all-star. It's ridiculous. And you don't vote a player who's not valuable enough to even be on the roster for a fourth of the season as the most valuable player. I get it that the Cal Ripken, Cecil Fielder era is over, where MVP awards can be awarded to last place teams, even though it can be true that the most valuable player can be on a team that underperforms. But try to tell me how Sinatra was more valuable to the Shock than Corey was to the Justice last season. You absolutely can't. Corey carried that freaking team from the DPS role, no doubt, especially in the latter half of that season. I'm not saying, it was Corey by a runaway stretch, but when it comes to value, yeah, way more value than Sinatra. So I hope all this fan voting thing is done with. Deciding who's an all-star and who's MVP was kind of a joke. So, take everything that you hear from anybody, including myself, with a grain of salt, either of how well you think a team is or not. Obviously, the results will speak for themselves. And it looks like, it's going to be a very fun and interesting year where I think the teams outside of the Excelsior that I think people are going to be dominant within their division might not be so much. All the Chinese teams are very, very exciting and are kind of question mark bubble teams to like high tier teams that we don't know how well they're going to do. But obviously we don't know how well the Valiants or the Fusion or the Gladiators are going to be either. So, don't think you always know what's going to happen because, everyone's going to think that London will roll over Paris and then Paris destroys them. And they still have two of their best players not even eligible to play yet. So a lot of excitement for this season, and I'm hyped.